Hi, this is Shauna. Before we get to today's guest, I want to take a minute to learn more about you, the listener. We've put together a short survey at fueltalent.com/podcast to gather information on who's listening and to give you a chance to make suggestions and comments about the show. I want What Fuels You to be a great resource for you and your interests, and I hope these interviews give you practical advice along with inspiration for your career and life. Help us continue to serve you better by going to fueltalent.com/podcast. Thank you so much. Now let's start today's show. Hi, this is Shauna, the CEO and founder of Fuel Talent. One of the things I have loved most in my 25-year recruiting career has always been the stories that people tell. Stories of leadership, career choices, company ideas, and team building. My inspiration for starting the What Fuels You podcast came from being curious about people's lives and wanting to help share their stories. What path brought them to this place? What decisions did they make that led to failures and successes? Who influenced those decisions, and what lessons were learned along the way? I hope you enjoy the What Fuels You podcast. Today's guest on the What Fuels You podcast is Kris Engskov. Kris is co-founder and CEO of Rippl, a venture-backed startup redefining the next generation of mental health for seniors. Leveraging a value-based approach, disruptive technology, and a relentless focus on empowering its clinicians, Rippl is pioneering a new care model to dramatically expand access to high-quality, wraparound mental and behavioral health care for seniors, their families, and caregivers. Most recently, Kris served as President of Aegis Living, one of the nation's leading innovators in providing assisted living, memory care, and wellness services to seniors. Prior to jumping into senior health, Kris spent over 16 years at Starbucks Coffee Company, where he held multiple senior leadership roles, including president of the company's flagship U.S. retail division, and earlier as president of Starbucks Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Previously, Kris worked for Madrona Venture Group, a Seattle-based venture capital fund, and earlier in his career, he was in public service. From 1993 to 2000, Kris held several positions in the Clinton White House, including assistant press secretary and personal aide to the president. He received his BA in public administration from the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. Welcome, Kris. So good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Shauna. Good to see you.
I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire first. You ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
What's your favorite? This is such a hard question. I hate this question, actually. What's your favorite movie?
Do you know, I'm watching all the World War II movies with my 10-year-old son right now, so I have to say Saving Private Ryan. We just got back from Normandy, and that was just such a time. I mean, those movies came out like 20 years ago.
Wait, is your son watching it?
He is, yeah.
Is he freaked out? I'd be like scared the shit out of a 10-year-old.
My wife and I have debated that whether he should be watching those movies, but he's just so into the history, and we just got back from Normandy, and he just like, I just love that I'm learning more than he's learning, and
That's really cool.
Love that. So we're watching those movies.
What's your Starbucks order?
Oh, like tall Pike Place. Nothing fancy. Like I love black coffee.
That's
I have to have like 3 of them every morning.
All right. I feel better. So you might as well just get the venti, or then it gets cold.
It does.
It's probably better for your budget to just go for the venti, no?
Yeah, I'm terrible. Even though I worked at Starbucks for many, many years, I still love truck stop coffee. It's just an Arkansas thing. Like I grew up that way in the hardware store.
I get it.
I love it.
I get it. If you could have lunch with anyone, I guess, alive or someone who's passed away, who would it be?
I think that's such a tough question. That's a lot harder than the movie. I would say, I still love, if you could be anybody, I would pick Nelson Mandela. I just think we have so few people alive today or dead that, are really like people that the globe could follow and learn from. And I think that's just an amazing story.
Yeah, no, totally.
Love that guy.
I don't know if you're a reader, but if so, what are you reading right now?
The most impactful book I think I've ever read is Strength to Strength. And you and I were talking a little bit about age earlier. Arthur Brooks wrote this book, I guess 2 years ago now. And it's all about how to be happy in the second half of your life and how your brain chemistry sort of orients it. What you can do, kind of lean into your brain chemistry in your career in your second half to be super happy and super fulfilled. And I literally re-listened to some of his podcasts every 2 months. That was the book that I read that I loved. And I've learned so much from it. It was like it just arrived for me at a perfect time.
I want to read this book. I think it's perfect timing for me too.
Well, I think Matt, it's funny, Matt McElwain, who I used to work with at Madrona Venture Group, mentioned this book to me like when it first came out, and he goes, "This book is going to change your life. You got to read it." And how many people say that to you? So you write it down and you get to it at some point. And when I read it, I was like, God, it's almost like he wrote this book for me. That, and I
I
think
can't wait to
feel
read
that
it.
same way.
Yeah. Hopefully it's on Audible.
People, yeah, you and I are both 51, and we have all this life ahead of us. We can do kind of anything we want to do. And it just helps you think about brain chemistry, because there's just stuff going on in your brain, right? That you either lean into, or you don't want to swim upstream. You want to go with the flow, and it's just so good. You'll like it.
Okay. Now it's
I'll
making
send
me
it to
want
you.
to like get on Amazon right away and get it. Is there a quote that you tend to reference or live by, or that
It's
resonates for
still
you?
overused, but I love that Teddy Roosevelt man in the arena
Oh,
quote.
the
Everybody
guy up at,
uses.
yes. I love that quote also.
It's a favorite. I mean, now everybody's adopted it, and you see it all over the place. But I still think that is just such a well. I don't know if he really said it or not, but if he did, it's true, right? The credit
We
goes
can
to the
fact
guy
check
who's
that.
out,
Yeah.
the guy or gal who's out there fighting a good fight. And
Yeah.
whether you win or lose, at least you know how it feels to go do the big fight. So
For some reason, it resonates for me when I'm on the sidelines at like my kids' sporting events and the parents are screaming.
yeah, my kids are big into sports too, and we watch a lot of sports, and it is the psychology of thinking about what it's like to be that age and being out there competing, and that you always hate to drive home with them when they've lost a match or
Oh,
a game
yeah,
or whatever, but that's when they learn,
of
and
course.
that's when we learn, and I think that's what that quote's about: is you're not always going to win,
Yeah.
but how much do you learn?
Yeah. Okay. So if you could have a superpower, what would it be?
I have a superpower. What would it be? I think it would be. I mean, again, these are super hard questions.
I'm giving you really hard ones. I literally go like mashed potatoes or baked potatoes, like for some people. But there was so much I wanted to ask you that I was like, maybe I can like disguise it through the rapid fire questions.
I think it's superpowers for me would be how do you just EQ to. I feel like I have a fair bit of EQ, but I think I would
Yeah.
love more of that. I mean, because it's always in the nuance. It's never in and so much of business is about, it's about EQ. It's about reading a room and understanding where people are. And I've thought a lot about that lately. Is I just wish I'd love to double down. And it's not something, you can get out of a book. You just have, it comes from experience, right? So my superpower would be EQ. More EQ.
I have to say, we've only known each other for half hour, which is weird because I agree we should know each other. But I'm a very good reader of people, and I think you've got very high EQ. I think that's one of your superpowers already. I'm guessing. I bet you if I asked around, people would be like, "Yeah, that guy." 100%. But you want more. That's what makes you have high EQ, is that you recognize it's important.
Well, you told me to be honest. I mean, sometimes I just totally miss something, like,
Really?
especially in managing people and that sort of thing, where you go into a situation, you kind of have this battle plan, or especially if it's, tricky or whatever, I don't know, with a customer, with somebody you manage or whatever. And sometimes you just totally get it wrong. And you go home and you just think, God, how did I miss that? And
Yeah.
I do that sometimes. And that's when I reflect on EQ, because it's not an exact science.
And do you ever go back to the person and then like say like, "Hey, I thought about this last night"? And I mean, talk about with a customer or with an employee, talk about how far that goes. Wow. Most
I
leaders
think
don't do that.
what I love about being 51, I know we're not supposed to talk about that and stuff, but I love being older and being so much more comfortable in my own skin. And I do that all the time. I think I am much, much more apt to go back to a situation and just say, hey, I just totally got that wrong. And
Yeah,
I'm going to try to make it better.
that's great.
It doesn't
And
happen
you're
all the
okay being
time.
vulnerable because you're comfortable and you're confident with vulnerability, which does come with age and experience for sure.
Well, and if you
Okay.
had that when we were 30, I just think about how much more we could have done, or I could have done, if I had just been open to that.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to get into what you have done because you've done quite a lot. So you should be very proud. But I'm going to hit you with your very last question. It's, what 3 words would your friends use to describe you?
I hope they'd say energetic, optimistic, and maybe I hate this word, but I think they would say I'm reliable. Like I'm going to do I'll do what I say I'm going to do. And I think
Yeah.
that's a good one, even though it's a little boring.
I don't think it's a very good quality in a friendship, though. When you really think about what you want in a friend who you can count on, right? That's great. Okay, so let's get into it. You are in Seattle. That's where we are crossing paths. But where are you from originally? It's from the South. And I love, you definitely have this voice for radio.
It's funny. It's funny you say that. I worked at a radio station when I was a kid. I grew up in a tiny town in Arkansas, 1,500 people, called Berryville, Arkansas. That's where I grew up.
1,500 people?
1,500 people. I think today it has 3,000, so it's grown a lot. But it was tiny, tiny town.
So there's like a post office, like a bakery.
Quintessential, like southern little town, town square. My dad owned the hardware store on the square, Main and Main, and it was a tiny town, and we knew everybody, and everybody knew us, and that's just where we'd grown up for generations. So.
And I did do some research and read that that's where Clinton was doing some of his campaigning, right?
Well, I mean, Arkansas is not a very big place, so when you ran for governor or attorney general of Arkansas, you inevitably came to this town.
To the hardware store, though, specifically?
Yeah, my grandfather and that's what we did when we were kids. I mean, we had a hardware store. That's what my whole family, we all worked in the hardware store. My great-great-grandfather started it. And my grandfather in this little town, I mean, he held court in the hardware store. That's where everybody gathered in the morning, had coffee. And
that's amazing.
Shot the breeze. And so inevitably politicians that were running for office would come through there, and Bill Clinton came there many times into the store. And this is back, well before he ever contemplated running for president, but he certainly was in there.
I'm curious. Let's go back to the hardware store. Are you handy?
No.
Like, can you come over? Can you come over and fix some things? No, not so much. Okay.
I wish I had that, though. I had it when I was a kid. My dad, that's one of those things that I look back on my dad and my grandfather, and this, like, they just fixed things. They just knew how to do stuff. And I think we've lost all that.
We completely lost all of that.
If something happened, what would we do, right?
There's some basic things that I feel like everyone should know how to do. I guess I'm not supposed to say like the men or the women, like everyone should know how to do some basic things. And I agree. It's like crazy. So you've been around entrepreneurship kind of your whole life, like generations of entrepreneurs. Did you think when you were little that maybe that was a path that you'd want to take, or was it expected that maybe you would take over the family business?
Oh, it was 100% expected that I would take over the family business. And I that opportunity existed, and I just didn't, road took me a different direction. And I don't think my family was disappointed in me in any way. They wanted me to go do what I wanted to go pursue, and it just didn't take me down that road. And I always did want to be an entrepreneur. My parents were. I often look back on my dad and my grandfather, and running a hardware store in a small town is a hard job. I mean, that's where I learned a lot about, my dad. I remember one of those poignant memories I have as a kid is delivering appliances to my dad on Friday nights out in the country, right? Taking a refrigerator to somebody. And I would often say to my dad, I remember saying this to him, I would say, like, Dad, it's like Friday night. Can't we just be at home? And my dad would say to me, we deliver things when people want it delivered, because that's what we do. And I always thought that was a sacrifice. And I look back today and I think, that's where I learned about being customer focused, right? That's your livelihood. In a small town, you do what you need to do. And I just thought he was a great role model for that.
100%. And do you have siblings? And where are they now? Where's the family now?
I've got a brother. All my family's still in Arkansas, except for me. I've got a brother in Little Rock, and I was asking you about your tennis career, but my brother played NCAA basketball for Arkansas for several years and won a Final Four. And like, my brother has his own story back in Arkansas, but one brother, and that's it. And he's a couple of years younger than I am, and he got all the athletic ability, and I got none of it.
And do they still have the hardware store?
No, the hardware store closed a few years ago. It just, small town hardware stores have just moved on. Unfortunately, it's just that business model doesn't work as the way it once did. But I still have this such a when I go back to my hometown, the building still there was this old, 19th century building, and it's such a romantic idea to think about what it was like to, in its heyday.
Yeah. So when you think back on like middle school, high school, what were some of your big dreams? What were you envisioning for your life at that point?
I mean, to be honest with you, most people in small towns in Arkansas, they kind of stay around and they grow up there. You play high school football and you graduate and you do what you'd kind of expect. People didn't really leave home very often. And I always knew that I wanted to go out and see the world. My mother was really, really good at showing us. I mean, we didn't have too much when we were kids, but, we'd do these driving vacations and we'd drive all these places. And I just remember my mother really trying to show us as much as we could see. And I just knew I wanted to go out and see what was out there. And it was and I didn't know what that meant, but that to me meant meeting people who could show you new experiences. And again, your parents are so influential and encourage you to do those things. Yeah. There's never expectation that if I wanted to stay, that was great. If I wanted to fly the coop, that was totally fun too.
That's great. That unconditional love feeling is like incredible. So you feel like you can let your wings fly. And so tell me about college. How'd you make the choice to go to school in Arkansas? And how was that? Was that the right choice for you? What'd you study?
Yeah, I think it was the right choice for me. I mean, I don't know that I knew a lot beyond the borders of Arkansas, really, right? That was kind of what you did. And I knew lots of my friends were headed over that direction. So the University of Arkansas actually has grown immensely since I went there. But it was fun. We had a great time there. I studied public administration. I had a really influential mentor early on, a woman named Ann Henry, who was actually very involved in Arkansas politics. And she ended up kind of becoming a major player in my life during that time, kind of guiding me, helping me understand. And she was one of those special people who just, she had evolved as a person and really understood the world, in a much more sophisticated way than maybe other folks that I was, working with at university. And she took me under her wing and just helped me. And public administration, I'm not sure that was a particularly valuable degree to go get, but it exposed me to lots of things. And ironically, I ended up, using it pretty effectively in my first job.
Oh, yeah. So your very first job was in DC in the White House, like right out of school? Or tell me, like, you get out of college, then what?
Well, I mean, it started before I got out of college. So Bill Clinton announced he was going to run for president in 1991, my final year in college. And, for those of us who grew up in Arkansas, the fact that we even knew of someone running for president was, pretty amazing. So we had this relationship with him. My dad and my grandfather had both worked for Bill Clinton at different times in politics. And, he announces, and I thought, gosh, how am I going to get involved in that? I was kind of interested in politics, and I thought, once in a lifetime opportunity. So I wouldn't say I quit school my senior year, but I certainly took a lot of time off to go do things on his behalf in this campaign. And when he started, I think it was October of 91. I mean, that would have been the beginning of my senior year. I remember there were like 5 people who really thought he could win. I mean, it was a big group of people running for president. And there just weren't it was still pretty far out. And I went on the road a little bit and tried to help. And then ultimately, he won. He gets momentum kind of in the back half of that 1992 year, and gets the nomination, and then beats George Bush. And I graduated in May, and a friend of mine, my closest friend in Washington, in Fayetteville, he and I decided we're going to go see if we can go get a job. Right, we're just going to take a risk. And I remember this was actually a really influential moment. I had a job offer from Tyson Foods, which was the big chicken company.
Oh yeah, we know Tyson Foods for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's like super serious, great company, opportunity to grow or whatever. And I told my mother, I go, Mom, I'm not going to take the Tyson Food job. I'm going to go to Washington. And she goes, well, do you have a job in Washington? And I go, no, we're going to go. And I think to her credit, she said, follow your dreams, do whatever you want to do. And I walked away from that. And this friend and I, we literally drove to Washington without a job, without a place to live. We loaded our cars with all our stuff. We drove up there, and we stayed in this stay at the town motel out in Alexandria for like a week, trying to figure out where we were going to live. And it was just one of those moments where you're just like, can't believe I did that. It was so character building. And we started to network our way around Washington. Obviously, we knew a number of people who had moved up there. And to try to get to the answer on what was your first job, Stephanie Street, who was the president's scheduler, I'd gone to school with her brother, and he let me go down and chat with her. And here we are. She's working in the White House. I actually get to go in and see someone who's there. This is 4 or 5 months in administration of the first year, and she said, why don't you? I think the best way to get a job in Washington is like just try to find a volunteer spot where you can just get in and get your foot in the door. And she sent me down to the press office, and I met this woman, and she said, yeah, you can volunteer, after the first 15 minutes of getting to know each other. And she said, I got all kinds of things you can do. And I just remember her going, when can you start? And I go, well, like, how about now? Like, I'm ready to go right now. And we literally, Catherine was her name, and we started working together, and we just got along great. And after about 5 months, a position came open in the travel office, which kind of looked after the press. And she goes, do you want to work here? And I'm like, absolutely. I want to work here. And I remember driving home that afternoon, calling my mother saying, hey, I'm going to work in the White House. And it was like, junior jobs, but, had a pass. I got to go in there, and that was my first job in Washington.
That's so crazy. Is that how it goes down? Like, I always think that's such a cool experience, and especially for young people to be working in DC. I recruited in New York for a long time, and a lot of the resumes, looked similar to yours, those first, 3 to 5 years out of school. And they just always described it as the best years ever. Very social, super prestigious, tons of learning, working on like-minded, super bright young people. Is that how it was for you?
Yeah. And I think that's exactly how it works. And, Washington is such a transient, fast moving. I mean, it favors people who are really open and are willing to work really hard. And I think there's always this sort of, I came to Washington with my University of Arkansas degree. I didn't know really anyone. I had this big chip on my shoulder a long time about people who went to fancy schools and had pedigrees and knew people. And what I realized really quickly was, Washington is actually made for people who just want to work hard and learn as fast as you can. And a lot of people ask me about how to get a job in Washington today. I still give them exactly the same advice I followed when I went there, which is get up there, network around, meet some people that really, start your engine, some organizations that you're excited about, and you will find a job. You're not going to find, you're talking about entry-level job, but
Right.
get your foot in the door.
Right. But be willing to do that. Right. Yeah. Be willing to do those, like the menial tasks. Yeah. That totally makes sense.
And it's such a meritocracy too. I think Washington really favors people who are, if you're smart and you're hardworking, they are going to pluck you out of there and move you up the ladder really quick.
So you're there over 7 years, ended at the President's Aide role. What is that position?
So since Thomas Jefferson, maybe, they've had this role called the President's Aide, and it's like just the coolest job in the world. So each president has sort of aide de camp kind of, it's not a senior job, right? You are just the guy who is there all the time, making sure the trains run on time, carrying the briefcase. But the job is amazing because it's the only job that I know of where you get to do and see everything the president does without any of the responsibility. Mm-hmm. And it was just such a magical. I already had this relationship with Bill Clinton that had gone on for several years with my family, so I knew him a bit. But then to get to step in, and play this kind of unique role with him, and when we spent you spend every day with him. And, I traveled with him. I organized his day, and it was the most magical job. Super hard, but very, super magical. I was
Oh,
so
I'm
privileged
sure.
to get to do it.
I'm sure. What did you learn from him as far as like, when you're around people and you're like, gosh, I want this quality. I wish I could like suck in all of this and come out the other side like in this way to emulate this human.
I think I'd say two things. I'd say first, his empathy for who he encountered, right? I could never relate the number of examples of I saw him when I think it started with listening. So his ability to listen to someone that maybe had never been listened to before. I mean, he would encounter people, out on these travels that he just had incredible empathy for. And he was open enough where he could hear them and incorporate what he was hearing and then what he would do to go take action. And I think the second thing was he used that empathy to go make things happen. And I think that's kind of not always understood about him, that he was a big listener. He could really internalize, I think probably a lot from his own personal history, the scenarios he was hearing, because he didn't grow up, with a silver spoon in his mouth by any stretch. Had a lot of challenges. And I just think growing up in the Ozark Mountains, out there traveling around trying to find boats. I think, talk about a guy who learned how to be high EQ. I think he really leveraged that in his benefit.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. So then it becomes the year 2000. Your times, come to an end in that chapter of your life. Was there an opportunity, or did you consider staying on in government, or what was your thinking around the next chapter, and how did you end up in Seattle at Madrona?
Well, as you remember, in 2000, that was kind of the .com, and I was like, "Go West, young man." I was like, "I gotta go." Like,
You wanted to
that's the
follow
next
the internet
chapter.
boom, yeah.
And I interviewed in California. I knew I didn't want to be in government. I knew I wanted to get into business, and I interviewed in California, and I interviewed with Patty Stonecipher. Actually, introduced me to the Madrona guys, and I came out here and I met Tom Alberg, who is just still someone I just feel privileged to have got to spend any time with. Matt McElwain had just started Madrona Venture Group. I mean, Greg Gottesman, that whole crowd, and it was just an opportunity to kind of learn from the bottom up in business, and they took me on and they just felt right. And I love Seattle. My best friend lived here, and I'd come out for his wedding, and I'd never been to Seattle before. And I was like, what is this mystical, magical, weird place that is Seattle? And I just decided to take the leap, and I found the role, and I moved out here. And I've been here ever since, really.
And was that with the intention of kind of going in the path of an operating role, or were you thinking that you were going to go the path of investor?
I had no idea. I barely knew to be honest with you, I barely knew what a venture capitalist did. I mean, I was just starting my business career, and Madrona was very influential because Madrona was really pretty early. I mean, they had just raised their first institutional fund. Seattle was just kind of coming into its own on the tech scene, and it was an opportunity to work with some very, very smart people who were, they were putting it together, as we were doing it as much as I was, and they gave me the opportunity to see it. I realized pretty quickly that I needed to be, though, in a more structured environment to really, I was coming in with, zero business experience.
Right.
And that's how I kind of ended up at Starbucks ultimately.
Yeah. Well, Starbucks is really the bulk of your career. I mean, almost 17 years. And I love that you started there, Director of Government Affairs and Public Policy. And when you hear about those types of jobs, they sound so like, oh, of course there's that role. But it's also like, what does that person do?
Well, that's kind of an odd story because Howard Schultz was somebody I'd met while I was still at the White House. And, he and I actually became, Howard Schultz came to the White House in 1993 at the president's invitation to talk about healthcare when literally, I remember being at the event, nobody really knew what Starbucks was. I mean, certainly in Washington. Maybe out here they did. And, I kind of stayed in touch with him. He and I kind of hit it off, and we stayed in touch during that whole time. And when I moved out here, he called me one day when I was at Madrona and said, "Hey, we're kind of, we're getting bigger, and maybe you should come down here. And I want to ask your advice on a couple of things around like the government." And we got into this whole conversation. He said, "Why don't you come down here and help us like figure out how to put this whole thing together on, just starting to see how Starbucks interacted with some of these, frankly, stakeholders that are just not some group that they thought about before, Congress, the White House, and we, what does that position do? I don't think we knew what it did at the time. It began to put together a strategy for a company that had a lot of exposure, frankly, with the government, both in the United States and globally at that point, in trade, in healthcare, in tax, in, employing lots of people. And you can't ignore those things as a good sized company. And we just helped put that together early on.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I always have been curious about those roles. And then that makes sense when you're saying it that way. And so then did you live, I know that you've worked globally for Starbucks, but did you move all around with Starbucks? You lived in those different countries, London, Austria, UK. I mean, are you just running that from Seattle? Like what?
No, we lived all those places.
You lived all those places?
We did. So I think the thing about Starbucks, so Starbucks was a great move for me because it put me in a structured environment where I could learn, and there were people around that had the time to teach me how to do what I was doing, and I could add some value on this government thing. And I remember saying to Howard, I said, "Howard, we'll get this solved. We'll get this set up, but I really want to be on the business side." And he, to his great credit, he let me do that. We spent about 2.5 years kind of getting organized and then getting a team put together. And then I said, I really want to go get in operations. And not really realizing what a risk that was at the time. But to his credit, he introduced me to the operations team, and I found this opportunity and actually moved to the UK to begin my operations career, and spent really the next, the rest of my time there, the next, 13, 14 years running, in operations. My wife and I moved to London twice. I lived in Switzerland by myself for a while. And honestly, I mean, this is all we're truncating this really, and down to a couple of minutes, but I mean, some of our best times as a family were living overseas. I mean, the opportunity. I can only
imagine. How many kids do you guys have?
2 kids,
2 kids.
13 and 10.
13 and 10. So with the kids, so this overlaps. I'm like doing the math in my brain.
Yeah, my son was born in London.
Okay.
My daughter was just 18 months old when we moved over there. And, we just, again, it was magical. It was like, getting to represent this big, important brand, but it was hard. It was hard markets. These were hard markets, France and Switzerland and the Middle East, places that we had to kind of build the business in a place where they didn't understand the brand like we do here in America.
Right.
But culturally, it was just so fascinating. I mean, to get to just drop into these markets and think differently about how to position Starbucks and to build the company, especially a retail company, was a great challenge, and we had a great time. I mean, both my family.
Tell me more about Middle East and Africa. Did you live both those places?
No, so I had 2 jobs. When I first went to Europe, I had the UK business. And then the president of the European business left, and I, was privileged to lead that business. And that's where I kind of picked up the Middle East and Africa. We had a very small business at that time. We just kind of entered, UAE through Dubai. And, for some reason, they are just crazy about coffee, American coffee brands in the Middle East. And we began to build that business out with a family from Kuwait. We had a sort of franchise agreement over there, license agreement. And then actually, Africa, we were in Africa in Morocco in a very small way, just a few stores. And I got the most fun I had at Starbucks was opening South Africa, because we got to, kind of, obviously the southern part of Africa is so different than North Africa. And the opportunity to go down there and really think through how we were going to enter a market that was just really was a coffee growing, it was an origin country, had such a different, approach to retail. And it was just, again, super fun to do it from, 0 to 100. And, now we have a great business down there, but,
incredible timing of the, growth story of Starbucks. Like your timing, how cool. I remember those days with Starbucks.
And I was super lucky. I remember thinking when I first talked to Howard, I think we had 500 stores. And I remember saying to my wife, I was like, God, we missed the boat here. Like 500 stores. Like this thing has already gotten away from us. And when I left Starbucks a few years ago, we had 31,000 stores across the world.
Oh my gosh, 31,000.
So yeah, to get to ride that, Howard calls it the magic carpet. It really was. We just such a fun ride, and I love that company. And we did it the right way, right? We built it the right way. And as much of what
tell me what you can about the Starbucks culture and how it's informed. Well, and we're going to get into Aegis also. I haven't had Howard Schultz on the podcast. I have had Dwayne Clark on the podcast. But I'm curious about how you would describe, I've met with a lot of people that have left Starbucks and also have recruited for Starbucks a little bit. I'm curious your way of describing the Starbucks culture and how it's informed your leadership style.
I think it's a servant leadership led organization, where genuinely people come to work in the morning and they think, no matter what role you're in, especially if you're in a leadership role, my job is to support those stores and the people in them. And, I don't think many people would probably like me saying this, but I don't know that we think about the customer nearly as much at Starbucks as we did the barista who worked in the store. And there was this basic formula that if you supported the folks who worked in the stores really, really well, they knew how to do the right thing for the customer. And I don't want to say it's more complicated than that, because I just don't think it is. Yes, there's a lot of behind that, but that was the basic philosophy, and that really worked.
Well, and also just the way that Starbucks takes such good care of their employees, and just all of the work around just equity, just everything. I think that it's an incredibly forward-thinking company. I've just always been very impressed with the values, and people seem happy. You can kind of feel the energy when you're in the corporate office.
Yeah, it's never perfect, right? There's just never a perfect thing. But I think if you're starting from that place, you're in so much of a better position to convince people to support the business model, right?
Yeah.
And I think Howard was gifted. He saw way ahead of that curve. And so many of us, even in the business I have today, right, we have adopted many of those. Everybody at Rippl, my current company, has equity in the company. Everyone.
I love that. Yeah.
And, we're focused on providers, right? All those are direct, Starbucks learnings, right?
Yeah.
To deliver success.
And so what motivated your transition from Starbucks to get into a whole different sector? I know we've talked about a few pivots in your career. It takes a lot of courage. What made you was that a specific passion move for you, or someone recruited you, or how did that happen?
Well, it's like everything that sort of happens. It seems very simple now, but as you look back, right? So 2 or 3 things were happening. Howard stepped down and Kevin Johnson took over. And I think it was just, Kevin was awesome, but it was just a different era, right? It was just, for those of us who've been around for a long time, I think it was a moment to kind of say, maybe we all do something different. And we've been lucky, right? I was fortunate, frankly, to be in a place where I could go take a big risk on something. And also about that time, both my parents independently, they're not together, but had near misses with the healthcare system. Big ones, like death-defying near misses with the healthcare system. And I was just flabbergasted, not really knowing much about healthcare, that either of those scenarios could happen. And the fact that happened at the same time was just. And the other thing I kept watching was, I think, again, you and I have grown up in almost the same way from a timing standpoint. In the old days, right, we knew our grandparents, but we never really paid much attention to older people. It was just kind of, that wasn't like a big category of business anybody thought much about. And what I started to realize was, when I read the papers in the morning, I just saw a lot more stories on, the kind of coming wave of older people. And I started to look at that, and what I realized really quickly, I think we'll get into this. I think we really dislike older people in America, or we would have much better infrastructure to support them. But I just think
100%.
people don't know what's coming. I mean, there is the biggest wave of all time of change, in who we're going to be taken care of. For the first time in a couple of years, and the first time in history, we're going to have more older people, meaning above 65, than we are people under the age of 18. And we are radically unprepared for that transition in a healthcare infrastructure. So I saw, to try to answer your question, I saw the opportunity to say, gosh, that seems like, man, if Starbucks is a big opportunity, it seems like older people in healthcare is a big opportunity. I wonder if I can go be a part of that solution, especially because I thought my parents got such a raw deal, and I thought I can go try to fix that a little bit. So naive, though, honestly.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm like, I get it. It hits so deeply for me. My parents are still completely, relatively healthy. They're 78 and 79. But they're like young and spry. I think you've probably met them. But it's scary when you think about that next stage of life, and to just make sure that they have everything that they need to feel comfortable and to live the life that they want to live. And it feels overwhelming to try to make a difference. And I can get it, why you'd want to, like going to Aegis Living, being the president there, cool company, obviously, incredible. But how do you even begin to chip away at that? It's such a big category.
Yeah, I mean, here's what I'd say. I remember when I made that move, my friends just said to me, like, what are you doing? Like, why you could go get a job in a retail company and keep going. Why are you doing that? And I felt very compelled. I have this really soft spot in my heart for older people, especially older people without a lot of resources. And I think that is a lot about growing up in Arkansas, because I saw so many people that they just got a raw deal. And I mean, if you look particularly in rural parts of America, I mean, they're closing hospitals, they're closing clinics. We are getting less healthy, not more healthy. And I think most people don't really understand that. Like
I don't get it though. We're putting so much energy into this, the wellness, and it makes no sense. I mean, I know that the eating thing and sleeping and exercise, but like, why are we so sick?
Because we have a sick care system. We have a system of healthcare that rewards investing in sick care as opposed to preventative care. And yes, you're seeing a bunch of wellness stuff, but most people don't. You're in you're in a privileged spot. We get to sit here and think about that.
Yeah.
We're serving a lot of folks over in Spokane right now, and we, particularly south of Spokane, down the Palouse there, on the Idaho border. We were out the other day in an assisted living community, and you know what? These are folks that desperately need help, and it's not there. And we're only dealing with the mental and behavioral health side, but it's very broad. And the thing that's scary about this is that we're not even. So the first boomer will turn 85 in the next 5 years or so, and it is just hard to imagine how many people are suddenly going to need really advanced care. That's not debatable, and we are just not prepared for it. And again, at Rippl, we're just biting off a small piece of the need in behavioral and mental health, but you cannot believe what's coming. And I think people have not really gotten their heads around what's going to happen. And I tell my 13-year-old daughter all the time, I said, you better like healthcare and you better like older people, because that's what you're going to do. I mean, we are all going to do that for many, many years in the future.
Tell me about Rippl, the origin story. You're a co-founder, and how did you come up with the idea, the name? How did it get funded? All of that.
Well, I was at Aegis, and what I was noticing, I mean, the experience at Aegis to take care of older people in these congregate care environments was like, especially during COVID, was like maybe the most humbling, profound thing I've ever done. And it really convinced me. I mean, I always knew that I would really like it, but it really convinced me that this was noble work, right? We got to go help older people. And it's not a sexy place, right? I mean, who wants to go work taking care of like frail older people, right? If you don't have to. Well, it's a big opportunity and there's a lot of mission in it. And I've always needed that in my work. And what I was seeing at Aegis was we were oftentimes sending residents to the ER because we didn't have the clinical capability to manage their behavioral symptoms related to dementia. And this is not Aegis or any place else. This is everywhere, right? And as I began to try to look at that problem, I'm making a long story short here, I began to realize that this is a gigantic gaping hole in the healthcare system. That if you're out there and you have a mental or behavioral health condition as an older adult, and I'm talking about real seniors, right? 75, 85, 95 years old, you got nobody. And I began to try to solve it, and I realized there was this very, very big business opportunity to try to go to sort it out. And I can get into all the reasons why it exists and that sort of thing. But Bob Nelson, who is the managing partner at Arch Ventures, who I've actually sat next to at Madrona when I started in 2000, who was sharing office space with them, and he and I had become acquainted and friends. He called me one day because we were on this board together, and he was asking me, like, what do you see in senior care? And do you see any opportunities? And I go, man, I've got a big one. Let's go, maybe we should go work on this together. And in that 10-minute call, we decided we would go, Bob is famous for taking on really, really difficult, healthcare problems that are kind of intractable. He loves that, the harder, the better. And we just started talking about this. And literally 10 minutes later, he said, let's go do it. So that's how we decided. Wow. And I left and we took it on. When we first started raising money, I mean, we did a number of things. I went out to McLean Hospital, which is one of the Harvard hospitals out in Boston. And we spent some time out there, they're the #1 psychiatric hospital in the country. And we just tried to learn as much as we could. Is this, was what I was seeing with residents in the ER. Are there really a lot of older people with dementia in the ER unnecessarily? And it turns out that is not only true, but it's dramatically true. And we did a bunch of other kind of research in looking at this, had actuaries actually study the claims data, and we validated that actually there really are unnecessarily a lot of older people in ERs. And unfortunately, once they get to the ER, they're 3 times more likely to end up in the hospital. Then they typically go to a nursing home or rehab. And sometimes, many times they don't make it home. And that could be any for a number of reasons. But even if you don't like older people and you say, you know what, who cares? They're old, and you'd be surprised at who believes that. Even if you don't think that's important, the cost of these folks is exponential, particularly in our space. So mental and behavioral health is one of the most expensive conditions out there. In fact, it's the most expensive of, neurocognitive diseases are the most expensive end-of-life disease there is, if you look at it, especially in the final year. And I'm going to try to answer your question. We started raising money. We went to all the, traditional players, as you can imagine, in venture, and they were really skeptical. I mean, I remember having some conversations like many entrepreneurs when you're first starting, beating your head against the wall. How do I help them see the opportunity the way I see it?
Right.
And it took about 8 months. And when we closed our round in September of last year, we had a syndicate that I think was as blue chip as I could have ever imagined, way better than I ever imagined. Thanks to Bob and many others who helped us. But they see the opportunity, and it was Google Ventures and General Catalyst and Arch Ventures, F Prime, which is Fidelity, and Mass General Hospital. And I genuinely look at that group, and it's like, I can't believe how lucky we are to have such incredible investors who really understand the opportunity and can help us, take this on.
And what did you describe when you first pitched the business as your business model, business plan, and has it pivoted or changed at all since then?
Yeah, wow. Has it changed? I mean, like every day it changes, right? As we're trying to, we're so early, right? We're
figuring it out.
I mean, so originally when we identified this opportunity, okay, why, if you're at home alone and you have dementia and you're caring for your spouse or your sister or your brother, how do we give you a resource, be it clinical or social or whatever it is, so that when you run into a problem, how do we give you a resource that you can call that will say, hey, here's the answer, instead of going to the ER? Because what happens today is that you're, 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night, you're an 85-year-old woman taking care of your 90-year-old husband who's mid-stage dementia. If he begins to get aggressive or have behaviors, which is very, very common with Alzheimer's and other dementias, you get nervous, you've never seen this behavior, what do? Well, you're not going to call your doctor because they're not going to pick up. You may call the nurse line down at the local hospital, and they're immediately going to send you to the ER. And then you go to the ER because that's what's available to help you. And unfortunately, once you cross that threshold, the ER they don't have the training either. And you end up sitting there, and these are real numbers. You will sit there for 5 to 8 hours. You will then oftentimes be admitted to the hospital for somewhere between 3 and 11 days. And because it's psychiatric or behavioral or mental, it depends on how you kind of categorize it, oftentimes it's very hard to discharge you because there is no place that has the capability to take care of you. And we are trying to get in the very, very front of that. We're using a collaborative care model of highly specialized nurse practitioners, licensed social workers and care coordinators working together in a virtual pod to try to be that resource for you and to call instead of, having the only option of going to the ER. And I know it sounds crazy, but there's just this, post-diagnosis, especially with Alzheimer's today, it's a black hole, for families and patients. I mean, they genuinely, I've watched this happen many times. Once you get that diagnosis, here's a brochure for the Alzheimer's Association. They have some resources that perhaps can help you. And they are awesome. We've got to know them very well, but they don't offer necessarily the wraparound holistic care that we need to really keep somebody at home for as long as they can.
So now pretend I call Rippl. I'm the 85-year-old woman. My 90-year-old husband is acting aggressively. What happens then? I call the company, and what do I get? And how do you make money?
Yeah. Well, there's two different things. I'll do what you get, and then I'll tell you how we make money. What you get is you get a resource. So first of all, we know you. We already know you. We have to have you. We have to know you before we can do this. Alzheimer's and dementia and neurocognitive diseases they're tricky because they're predictable but unpredictable. I tell people a lot, right? If you've never seen it, very unpredictable. So we really need to understand and know the patient and their medical history. So we'll have to have had that patient on board before that call comes. But then when the call comes, I think our job is to triage the situation and give you clinical or social support that would allow you to solve whatever's happening and determine whether it's really an emergency. Oftentimes the complicating factor here is that, someone who's 85 doesn't just have Alzheimer's. They may have a number of things, right? And we use family nurse practitioners that are really specialized in this space that can really do a good job of triaging the situation. And hopefully, if it's truly related to the cognitive condition, taking you through how we're going to solve this. And again, be it clinical or social, and keeping you out of that ER. And I think 9 out of those 10 calls, we can do that with this really kind of holistic care model that, again, is primarily virtual and, leverages specialization, because one of the big problems here is there's no one out there. And when I say no one, Jerry Psychiatry, which is obviously medical, MD level psychiatry, it is the smallest practice out there. There's nobody getting into Jerry Psychiatry, which is ironic because that is who we're going to take care of in the next 30 years.
100%. 100% agree with you. So how does the company make money?
How do we make money? Well, we're going to thread a needle here, right? So you've probably read a little bit about, there are two different kinds of sort of payment models in healthcare in America today. There's fee for service, which is really how you and I get our healthcare. We go to the doctor and the doctor does things to us and they charge us on a fee schedule. And really, when we go home, yes, I'm sure they want us to be healthy and get better and have good outcomes, but they still get paid no matter what. And in fact, the way fee for service healthcare works today, you're kind of incented to do as many things to you and I as you can, because that's how you would make more money. We are trying to build this model within a value-based system, which, is becoming increasingly part of how we're going to deliver healthcare more efficiently. And basically what that does is you contract with insurers or providers to deliver this care, and we get paid when we deliver good outcomes for you, meaning you have to, in dementia's case, right, you're not going to get better necessarily, but we're keeping you out of the hospital. We're delivering on some of these health outcomes we're keeping you stable, in your current condition. And we're doing it less expensively than if you went just to into fee for service healthcare. Because many people have different needs. There's no reason that I need to see you every 3 days to make sure you're doing okay. Maybe I can see you once a week or once a month or once a year. And I can customize that care for you. And again, we don't get paid unless you get better or stay stable, if that makes sense. So
the business model, the family's the one paying you.
No,
who's paying
ultimately,
you?
yes, but we're paid by insurance companies and accountable care organizations.
Okay. So when you're doing outreach and BD, business development outreach, it's to insurance companies. That's who you're partnering with? We're
really early. So yes, and we are also working fee for service as we get started to prove the model out. You asked me earlier if we're using the same model we started with. I mean, the reason this doesn't exist today is because fee-for-service healthcare doesn't pay for the holistic care for some of these conditions. And the irony of ironies, right, which there are many in healthcare, oddly, going to the ER might be better in some scenarios for the payer. Not ultimately, but we're trying to give them a better answer to that, right? Keep you out of the ER to take care of you better and to take care of you less expensively.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So what markets are you currently in and what are your growth plans?
We're just today in the state of Washington. So we just started serving patients at the end of January. And we're serving patients from, Bellingham to Tacoma to Vancouver out to, the Palouse and Spokane. So all across the state, most of our care is virtual, especially the clinical pieces of our care. So we really are very flexible in that way.
Yeah. And how does someone know if they've got early onset dementia? Are there tests out there for it? I know that there's a lot of I just was reading about Martha Stewart, how she just looks so incredible right now. Literally this morning I was reading about her tips and she gets up in the morning and does her crossword puzzle to keep her brain going. But if she woke up one morning and was like, wait, this is weird, my crossword puzzle, I can't do it. Or I forgot where my keys are. I forget where my keys are. How do you know when it's happening?
Well, so early onset is a very different condition than I would say traditional dementia. Early onset, yes, that's a very clinical scenario. And there are a number of different tests to decide whether you have that, from blood-based to sort of to visual assessments to, basic cognitive assessments, which is really how it's been done for a long time. Most of what we deal with is what I would call traditional dementia, right? Amyloid plaque on your brain. And, typically, out of every 100 people, about 10 of those are every 100, group of seniors above the age of 65, 8 to 10 of those will be diagnosed with some kind of neurocognitive disease. There's probably another 10 to 12, there may be more, that are undiagnosed. As you know, there's a lot of stigma associated with dementia, especially in rural environments where people, they're pretty independent. And the last thing they want to be told is that, they're losing their memory or they're having difficulty there. So a big part of what we're doing is we are diagnosing dementia. We use an FDA-approved assessment that's pretty standard. 50 to help you recognize whether you actually have the disease or not. And there's lots of stages, right? There's what they call mild cognitive impairment, which is the early stages of dementia. And then there's, dementia itself. And, what people sometimes don't realize is the majority of dementias, there are probably 200 different kinds of dementia out there, but the majority of it is Alzheimer's. And it's what most people that encounter the disease are dealing with. And that's what we see the most of, and probably are most effective at helping people navigate and manage.
So it's more about managing it. It's not about slowing it down. There's nothing you can do. Like if you find out that you've got this mild cognitive early, signs, it's like you just know what's coming. It's not that you can say, oh, well, now I'll start eating more broccoli and sleeping more and taking these vitamins. Or is there something you can do?
Well, I'm not a doctor.
These are probably not the best questions, but I'm actually like legit super curious.
Well, it's a super interesting part of medicine. Like I'm not a doctor. I'm going to say that. I'll say that 100 times, right? But in studying, we're surrounded at the company at Rippl with, I think, some of the most progressive thinkers in the space. From pharma, people who are deep involved in therapeutic development, to people who are, at McLean Hospital, deeply involved in progressing care models that, figure out how to care for people better with these conditions. But I think the broad answer to your question is, there's a lot of good, for the first time maybe in 20 years, in the last 3 months, there's been some very positive news coming out of therapeutic development. So there are a couple of different drugs, Aduhelm and lecanemab, that have shown for the first time in a very long time some ability to slow the progression of the disease, when really there's been nothing even remotely optimistic for a long time.
Yeah, that's great news.
Yeah, it is. It's early, but there's a lot of research and development going on in that space. In fact, Ryan Watts, who co-founded and is the CEO of Denali Therapeutics, is one of the leaders in this space, and designing therapeutics for neurocognitive diseases has been a big influence on us and how to think about, how we may help with that over time as these therapeutics become more available. But it's still very early.
I know that it's early for the company, but thank you on behalf of everyone, because this is something that's important, and I'm glad that you have taken it on, and I'm excited to watch what you continue to build. I'm curious if you are drawing in talent, what you can tell people who are listening about why they should want to come work at Rippl, beyond getting to work with you and this incredible challenge that you're taking on. I mean, obviously, I think it's going to be a passion play for a lot of people. People want a sense of purpose. Right now, I can tell you, after 30 years of recruiting, I'm hearing that more than ever from candidates. But specifically about the culture and what makes someone successful there, what would you say?
I love this question, because this is my favorite topic, right? The opportunity. So I feel lucky that I somehow found my way into healthcare. And like I said, I've always been very mission oriented. So, compared to Starbucks, which I, had some mission, this is like life and death mission. I get up every day, and I just am so grateful that I get that opportunity. And I think we're finding that, I say this again, taking care of older, frail people with these conditions is not sexy. And yet that's why we need people to come and help us do it, right? And I convince people all the time to come join us. And what we're finding is we have a really mature and experienced leadership team, frankly, people that could be doing anything else they wanted to do. And we've convinced them to come over here and join us in this, really something I think they'll look back on 20 years from now and say, wow, we changed the game. And
100%.
That is hard to find, right? Very hard to find.
Super hard to find. I love it. I'm excited to continue to watch. So my final question for you is, what fuels you?
What we just talked about. I love a couple of things. I love that we've taken on, it's back to Bob and I's conversation early on. This is one of the darkest, hardest, most difficult nuts to crack in healthcare. There's no doubt about that. I think as I've gotten around to, there are lots of healthcare startups out there, right? Trying to solve various pieces of the pie. It's just so big. But like, I feel like we are putting a very big light into this corner, and we are going to open this up. And look, rising tide's going to lift all boats here, right? We don't have to own every part of this business. In fact, I think we'll spur lots of new companies to get into this space, because this is a wide open category.
Yeah.
Despite the number of people that need help, despite, this is not new, there are just not many people out there in the space. So I hope we spur others to come in here and join us and see why this is such great work. The other thing that I would just add here is that we've tried to approach this brand. We haven't talked much about the brand, but I swear when you start a healthcare company today, the first thing you do is like you pick out the shade of aqua seafoam green you're going to put on the website. You're going to build a paragraph that tells people what to do, and no one's going to understand it. Like, I want to approach older people healthcare in a totally different way than has been done before, right? We can be optimistic and hopeful. And, just because you get a dementia diagnosis, I mean, like, we say it all the time, like, man, it's not the end of your life. You got lots of life to live. And maybe it's just a great reminder that you got to get your bucket list going and get out there and make it happen. And our job is to help you do that. Our job is to enable that. And that's 100%. The way we try to do it with our clinicians. I think it can be dementia right now is positioned as this very sad, dark place of, abandonment and loneliness. And it's so not that, yes, there's not a cure today, but man, there's not a cure for really lots of things that we could encounter. And we're gonna approach this very differently. And that's where Rippl came from, by the way.
Interesting.
We picked Rippl because, a ripple is something that typically, if you make enough of them, turns into a much bigger wave. And I know that sounds a little hokey, but we are going to build this category. We're going to get a lot of new people into the space who know how to care for these folks, and we are going to build a wave that's going to make the world better. So that's why I'm doing it every day.
Thank you for listening to the What Fuels You podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, and follow us on social media to keep up with the latest news and episodes. You can also contact us at podcast@fueltalent.com to provide feedback, ask questions, and share topics or guests you would like us to cover in the future. We hope you feel inspired by our guests and that we have helped fuel your day. Join us next time for another episode of What Fuels You.